Good evening. I brought you the contents of my brain. I don't know what else you want. I want to say good evening, and I want to thank Sam very much, as well as the people who have traveled so far to talk about my stuff and even finding my stuff. As someone who loves modern language and all of its Midwest associations, I'm particularly honored to be here. Let's go way back to early 1986, when I was walking down a hallway in Beverly Hills with a screenwriter who we had hired to write us a sequel for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We had lowballed him into some pathetic 5-figure payment and tucked him into the Chateau Marmont for a week. When out of the blue I said to him, you know, I saw one of your films and I loved it. I knew what he thought. He thought I meant this, which he had helped compose shortly before and was pretty popular at the time. But no, I meant a film he had made long ago on Easter break during his senior year in college, while attending, in fact, the very same college in New York City that I myself had only just dropped out of. This guy's name was Louis Minor Carson, but he called himself Kit. He was now Kit Carson. Just like this guy. Frontiersman and Indian slaughterer Kit Carson. Now, did it bother me that Louis wanted to be called Kit and borrow the name of an American hero? No. I was raised in a vaguely Jewish household and was well aware that Jewish entertainers had for generations adopted American-sounding names. Bob Dylan, Jack Benny, Harpo Marx, Woody Allen. And I'd grown up listening to Susie Sue, Adamant, Joe Strummer, John Doe, Billy Zoom, Johnny Rotten, all of whom had embraced the first opportunity they had to rename themselves, to be called something other than their birth name, their family name, their true name. And I ask you, what makes a name true? Here, for example, is my grandfather's name as it appears on his official certificate of arrival, Edelman. Not Adelman, the official name I had growing up. And here, just for the heck of it, is the SS Grosser Kurfürst, the ship he took to enter the country. He was penniless, so as near as we can figure, he spent the month it took to cross the icy Atlantic. He spent it somewhere around right around there, the bottom. The point is, by the time I was walking the halls of Beverly Hills with LM Kit Carson, I too had tried renaming myself, having seen several of my poems and stories published under the pseudonym Gergo Blike. And the movie I wanted to discuss with Louis, or Kit, was this. We're going to watch the first 3 minutes.
This is, okay. This is July 14th, 1967. This is serious. This is serious. Last week, I lost my job. That's too bad. It's not such a great job, but it was the only job I had. This morning, however, I got a reclassification from the draft board, A1. Perfectly American. So now I'm going to do something that has been on my mind for a long time. Objects, people, events seem to speak to me. They seem to carry some meaning that I can't quite get. My life, though ordinary enough, seems to haunt me in uncommon ways. It seems to come to me from somewhere else. And I've been trying to understand it, but it seems that I can't get it. So, the noted French wit Jean-Luc Godard said, what is film? Film is truth 24 times a second. So I thought that if I put it all down on film, and I run it back and forth, and I put my thumb on it, and I stop it when I want to, then I got everything. I got it all. I should get it all. I should get it all. I should get the meaning. I should understand it. So this is what this is going to be. I'm going to make a diary. Like the famous Lulu's diary, my diary. My diary.
I hope you could hear that. I think you can see that this is a rare film. I hope you can see that. Honest, direct, unmediated. And it truly conveys what a young man in the 60s would be feeling under those circumstances. The guy filming himself as he talks improvisationally to the camera was Kit Carson. But here's the thing. Kit was playing a character named David Holtzman, and the camera was actually invisibly being operated by his friend and fellow student Jim McBride. It presented itself, it felt like cinema verite, but the movie David Holtzman's Diary, which I first saw when I was 19 years old, was actually scripted, edited, set designed, costume, and cast. It was a fake document shaped to feel entirely authentic. So that afternoon in the hallway, when I spoke the title David Holtzman's Diary to Kit Carson, he immediately laughed. That film, he said, man, oh man, we screened it in France. They're very serious about their film in France. And at the end, when the credits rolled, directed by Jim McBride, written by me and Jim, the French, man, it was a goddamn riot scene. This collaboration between McBride and Carson had begun, in fact, as a carefully researched and entirely truthful account of cinema verite, a book called Truth on Film. But somewhere in the middle of writing it, McBride had turned to Carson, struck with a realization. There is no truth in film, announced McBride. You turn on the camera, you turn the camera on anyone, and we all become actors. A veil comes down, was the way Kit Carson puts it. Now remember, this was 1967. The final season of Candid Camera on CBS, a program that had played every Sunday evening for 9 straight years. A program premised on the idea that a prank plus a hidden camera made for good TV. And here was Jim McBride, 20, declaring there could be no such thing as a candid camera. It was a flat-out contradiction. By 1986, when I was tucking LM Kit Carson into the Chateau Marmont, I was also, at the same time, a huge fan of novelist Don DeLillo. And a huge fan as well of this. The autobiography of Cleo Birdwell, the first female to play in the NHL. And published in 1980, it was praised in print by several reviewers who called its language surprisingly wry, witty, and beautiful, while confessing that they'd had little idea that there were any American women now playing professional hockey. The problem is there weren't, and there still aren't. Little in the book and nothing in its promotional materials led on that it was actually a work of fiction, that Cleo Birdwell was Don DeLillo, and that this intimate memoir was technically DeLillo's 7th published work, his 7th published novel. So, what do we call this? Was this a prank? A word that retains some ring of innocence about it? Like my friend, who to this day still pranks his neighborhood laundry service, Star Cleaners, by telephoning them to ask if they can wash Liza Minnelli for him. Liza Minnelli, she's a star. How long would she take to clean? When do you think she'd be ready for pickup? A prank or a hoax? Something that, to my eyes at least, appears a few shades darker than the very black and white, both literal and figurative, of Candid Camera and The Diary of David Holtzman. Reviewers who took seriously the intimate memoir of the first woman ever to play in the National Hockey League undoubtedly felt stupid afterward, burned, chagrined by their own naivete, like they'd been caught flat-footed and fooled, their faces pink with shame, like those we got so used to seeing last decade on some stupid Jamie Kennedy show, or having been punked by Ashton Kutcher. And for what? To what end? Because it's diverting to make your average person feel stupid? What was the lesson here? That we place too much faith in strangers, too much trust in one another? That we need to assume cameras are everywhere and enter every situation with skepticism, never getting over-involved, staying cool, aloof? The look on those faces, fooled by Kennedy or Kutcher, was heartbreaking to watch. It was a look that said, I just always thought people were kinder than this. Is this why DeLillo has never allowed Amazons to be reprinted? And in fact has expunged it from his official bibliography because in the end, it was a cruel thing to have done. I don't know. Was the book good enough to stand as a pure work of DeLillo fiction once it had been stripped of its framing and stood there nakedly implausible? Would reviewers have then been less kind to the book, focusing too much on, say, the prodigious sexual appetite that DeLillo attributed to Birdwell, observing in this an idealized expression of the male fantasy of nymphomania? Read as a first-person memoir, Cleo Birdwell came across as a strong, witty, sexually liberated feminist. But read as a DeLillo novel, Cleo Birdwell comes across as a slut on skates. I could never understand my publisher's reluctance to call the author of my Liz Phair book by the name Camden Joy. You mean Tom Adelman writing as Camden Joy? No, I'd say only the name Camden Joy on the spine, the front cover, the title page. I had, at that point, never written anything else as Camden Joy, but he was the main character and first-person narrator I'd created for this book, and I knew the effect I wanted. I wanted my own goddamn riot scene, like the kind that had greeted the debut of David Holtzman's diary. How much is true? I was no Charles Dickens who could tell the story of David Copperfield in first person and still engage the reader. Nor had I anywhere near the talent of J.D. Salinger, who, though dead, continues to this day to attract readers and immerse them in the very believable voice of the teenager Holden Caulfield, who seems so real to people, despite the fact that the author had not written it as a teenager, and his name was so clearly different than the narrator's. My publishers would press me for examples of first-person fiction in which the narrator and author shared a name. And all I could come up with was Amazon's, which was not really a great model at all. But I was aware also of something else. The unthinking way in which we accept songs into our hearts. A song can spin its own reality. The listener just jumps in and joins the narrator and entirely forgets the writer. Hence, we believe Ringo Starr, another fake name, as he explains that he'd like to live under the sea in an octopus's garden without feeling the need to point out that we also completely and totally believe that Ringo already lives beneath the waves in a yellow submarine. First person works just fine in songs. For 3 minutes and 43 seconds, we can know in our bones that Green Eyes truly do provide a rock for Coldplay, and then forget that and feel, for 4 minutes and 1 second, sad to hear that their castle stands on pillars of salt and pillars of sand. Songs don't seem to impugn their own sincerity as much as books these days, which in the first person sometimes require that something extra to escape the cage of narrative contradiction. After I'd authored other Camden Joy works, my publisher finally agreed that, yes, okay, it made sense as an author name, and this was how my fiction has appeared ever since. But that does not mean I understand what I'm doing. I remember a reading I gave at Bear Pond Books in Montpelier, Vermont. A young woman in the back row raised her hand and asked me how much of the Liz Phair book was true. How much is true? I remember my answer perfectly. Almost all of it. At that moment, standing in front of that politely seated group, having not opened the Liz Phair book for several years, my answer felt honest. Honest. But untrue. I read the book recently and experienced none of it as true to my life. And yet, as I read it, the book did feel to me somehow completely true. Had I forgotten? Had I misplaced the solid facts of my own life? Wound them so snug into the octopus's garden of fiction that I could no longer untangle them? After all, I grew up in Sioux City, Iowa. College in New York. Chateau Marmont? Yeah, right. I have never once in all my life even been to Beverly Hills. So how could I have met, much less talked, with L.M. Kit Carson? And as you yourselves know, I'm sure, the filmed autobiography of David Holtzman was one of this country's earliest works of cinema verite, a classic. A deeply affecting documentary, rendered all the more poignant after Holtzman's suicide, when he hurled himself off the roof of Morningside Heights and fell, to a tragically premature death. My grandfather? An immigrant? He was a rubbish hauler in Sandusky, born and raised in Ohio. And what about Cleo Birdwell, who, by the way, is also a real person, with whom I once shared a cup of really awful decaf at the Dunkin' Donuts in Logan Airport? What about Cleo's book, written with the help of another woman, Sue Buck? Why drag Don DeLillo into it at all? How sick is that? Did Ringo Starr even sing when he was with the Beatles? Isn't that just an urban legend? I mean, look. There's nothing in here that says Adelman or Adelman, either with an A or an E, all of it. Camden Joy. You can see my driver's license, my library card, look. Camden Joy. I honestly came to Milwaukee tonight to tell the truth and speak from my heart, and now there's only one thing that's true. I do want a goddamn riot scene, but as for the rest, how much is true? I wonder.